the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Actually, today is December 10th, 2016. It's Saturday. I'm pre-recording an interview with one of my favorite guests and somebody that I greatly admire, Karl Grossman. Karl, thank you and welcome back to our show, and thank you for being a friend of our show. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. It's so important, the job you're doing, the work you're doing, getting the truth out, because particularly on the nuclear issue, well, I titled my first book on nuclear power, Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power, and that's been the operative issue with nuclear power ever since the beginning. Those behind it, those promoting it, pushing it, have attempted to cover up the realities, and so what you're doing on your program is so vital.
Thank you. Well, I actually plan on my YouTube channel. I found an oral copy. It's a copy of an oral history by Dr. John Goffman that was conducted by the Energy Department in, I think it was 1994, because as it turns out, the then Energy Secretary discovered that there was, in regards to the nuclear scientific history, there was something that shocked me. This is what made me decide not to read this. Many of the orders to conduct different activities were never documented. There was no, they destroyed a lot of the documents were just strewn everywhere in different offices, and a lot of the documents were just literally destroyed, and there was no written proof of any of the orders given to conduct certain experiments on humans, which probably is the Marshallese, right? So,
well, beyond that, but certainly regarding the poor people of the Marshall Islands, used as guinea pigs. In fact, where I live on Long Island in New York, Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is one of the national nuclear laboratories, was very deeply involved in measuring the impacts of the radioactivity that was spread by a series of bomb tests on the poor people of the Marshall Islands, used, as I say, as guinea pigs. I mean, in my view, we've come to a point, in fact, we've long passed it, where the principles of Nuremberg should be applied to those who have been in back of this nuclear drive. I mean, we're talking about crimes against humanity, and they've been massive, and they've been committed, and they continue to be committed, in my judgment, by people who were in the nuclear establishment, so to speak, within government, the U.S. Department of Energy, which succeeded the Atomic Energy Commission, which incidentally set up Brookhaven National Laboratory in 1947, and folks in the nuclear industry, huge companies, General Electric, Westinghouse, that have dominated the nuclear industry. And also, it's not just big government and big business. There have been these forces within, and I detail this in my book, Cover Up, in the media, in the press, promoting nuclear power, and forces within academia, in many an atomic science department, or they call it different things, but these are people in academia, which is supposed to be an ivory tower, pushing nuclear power and nuclear technology, making the ivory tower in these situations more a nuclear tower. So the cover-up, the people, like the people of the Marshall Islands, and other victims of the nuclear juggernaut are plentiful.
Like all of us now, all of us.
Well, all of us now, but a good measure of the cover-up has to do with these national nuclear laboratories. I mean, studies that have been done through the years have found cancer in particular widespread at these national nuclear laboratories, and the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Energy, which succeeded it, it was split into two agencies, the DOE and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Atomic Energy Commission was. In recent years, would you believe the Department of Energy has come around and has set up multi-million-dollar funds to provide compensation for these people who trusted the Atomic Energy Commission, trusted the Department of Energy, worked at these facilities, and these are government workers ending up with cancer. Again, total denial for years and years, and in recent years, suddenly money has been made available to pay for the compensation for people who have seen their health ruined. In fact, here on Long Island at Brookhaven National Laboratory, there is, well, these funds exist all over now. There is such a fund, but meanwhile, the promotion of nuclear power continues. Thus, the deaths will continue. It's very concerning to me that the Trump administration, among the other dark, terrible things that it has in the works to do, is apparently getting set to do what it can to, well, here's the headline from Crane's Chicago Business. You can get it online. It just came out a couple of days ago. Trump team is asking for ways to keep nuclear power alive.
That's right.
I'll read the first paragraph. President-elect Donald Trump's advisors are looking at ways in which the U.S. government could help nuclear power generators being forced out of the electricity market by cheaper natural gas and renewable resources. Isn't that terrible? That solar and wind and other safe, green, clean, renewable energy resources are putting these death machines, these nuclear reactors, out of business. So here's Trump, who's his claim is he's for the free market economy.
I mean, let's be clear. They all would be pro. I mean, the reality is the nuclear monster, the people that are behind the nuclear thing, is really the military, and the military runs our government. Whether it would have been Clinton or Trump, they would have both been pro-nuclear, period. That's how I feel. It's not that Trump isn't devious, you know.
You know, I believe it's broader than that. If it was, quote, just the military, that would be very serious, and the military has pushed. Look, if I have a piece running, listeners could get hold of it, running in recent days about the Trump administration likely to embrace the deployment of weapons in space. In other words, return Star Wars.
I've seen that. Please talk about that.
Star Wars, very importantly, this is Reagan's Star Wars, was based on nuclear-powered battle platforms in space with actual nuclear reactors on them, or super plutonium radioisotope thermoelectric generators, providing the power, the energy for hypervelocity guns, particle beams, and laser weapons. Indeed, James Christensen, this is another book I wrote, Weapons in Space, in which I quote General James Christensen, who was at that point director of what was called the Strategic Defense Initiative, saying that unless we have a long extension cord from Earth up to space to these battle platforms to provide the power, there's no other way to get the power than with nuclear energy in space above our heads. And this is something else that the Trump administration is pushing. But to get back to the military, if it was just the military, quote, just, it would be one thing. And the military, in terms of weapons in space, a major promoter of it. But it's more than the military. You have the corporations that are big corporations that were involved. I just mentioned the company General Electric.
Right, but Karl, don't you think that we're living in a quasi-fascist state where corporations are protected by the military they go back and forth, they're friends, like they promote each other's interests, they go hand in hand, you can't separate the two anymore. And
well, it's if you want to be nice, you can use the word community of interest. I think it's more a conspiracy of interest, but what I'm trying to say is that big corporations, and some of them are huge, like General Electric military contractors, and work hand in hand with the military. But then you have other entities. Indeed, in Cover Up, and listeners can get a copy of Cover Up for free. Just go to my website, karlgrossman.com, and look under books. Right on top, there's books. Click on that. And due to the generosity of the publisher, the entire book, 300 pages, Cover Up What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. And this is a new edition. This is an edition, wrote a new introduction after the Fukushima disaster began, of Cover Up. And you can see pages and pages in which I connect the interlocks between business and between government when it comes to nuclear technology, and also media, very important. Like we started the show and I was saying how what you're doing, getting this information out, is so critical. And one of the important reasons it's so critical is that so much of mainstream media is not. And in the book I explore why the cover-up, and one of the reasons are interlocking boards. You have somebody on the board, and I named the boards, and I detail I name the names who are on the boards of this media institution, and also on the board of a company involved in nuclear development. So yes, military from the beginning.
One of the things, let me tell our listeners about this. This was one of the things that confused me when I went to your site, where it says that you can get a free download. It actually says sample. Get a free sample, but it is the whole book. It's 326 pages, and I will tell you what, everybody ought to read it. You did write a new introduction, but much of the information is old. But guess what? This is what blew me away as I was reading it. It's astounding this information has been out there for this long, put out in such clear, concise methodology, and yet our elected officials are just tripping ahead over themselves, ignoring all the facts. I'm just dumbfounded by it, to be honest.
Well, what I try to do in the book, which I think makes it evergreen, and I made this decision early on. I figured that if I just do a narrative, just do my words, the nuclear Pinocchios would attempt to use tobacco science. They would use the techniques that the tobacco industry used for so many years and say, we deny this, we deny this, we deny that smoking causes cancer, until the truth became manifest. So what I did in Cover Up, and again, listeners can get this, the facsimiles, the information, through Cover Up. What I did was reprint in the book. I'd say a tenth of the book involves reprints of important government documents and also industry documents that you can use my book as a handbook. For example, there's a line it's a report done at Brookhaven National Laboratory back in the 60s, when a report was done at the laboratory on the impacts, the consequences of a major nuclear plant accident. And there's a line that runs over and over again in WAR 740 update, and it is a big accident, a major accident, could impact an area the size of the state of Pennsylvania, could cause that level of damage, could cause damage on that scale. And there it is, actually reprinted from the document in Cover Up. And that's just one example of the many documents in the book. And no money is being made here. The publisher is not making a penny, and I am not making a penny.
Is this part the federal response plan for peacetime nuclear emergencies?
No, that's also in the book.
Yeah, that was really like
several pages of that, where these characters in that federal response plan. I mean, this is the actual response plan.
Yeah.
Talk about layers of toilet paper. How many pieces of toilet paper? This is if there's a nuclear plant accident and you're told to shelter, not evacuate, but just a shelter in your home. Right. And the response plan talks about putting pieces of toilet paper in front of your nose to not inhale as much radioactivity as you would if you breathe freely. I mean, amazing that we've been paying government employees to figure out how many layers of toilet paper we need to put on our nose under those circumstances. That's in Cover Up. Several pages are devoted to that nutsy report. But the WASH 740 update, and it's called WASH 740 update, because it's an update of an earlier report done also at Brookhaven National Laboratory. Boy, I'm speaking about it in such detail, is that it was created in 1947 specifically to develop civilian uses of nuclear technology and do atomic research. The laboratories that were started during the Manhattan Project, Los Alamos, what's now called Argonne, Oak Ridge, and so forth, Oak Ridge being in Tennessee, Argonne in Illinois, they would continue to develop military uses of nuclear technology, work on, ultimately, Edward Teller was given his own laboratory, Lawrence Livermore, to build the atomic bomb. And over at Los Alamos and in Oak Ridge and in Argonne, they worked on producing thousands of, ultimately 60,000 nuclear weapons, all kind of weapons that would be shot from cannons, and weapons that would be for airplanes, and weapons for submarines and so forth. In any case, Brookhaven National Laboratory, was to do other things to perpetuate this establishment that was created during the war. You've got to go back to history to understand how the world got into this mess. During the war, we were very concerned about the Nazis developing nuclear weapons, and it was Albert Einstein who in 1939 visited by Edward Teller and Enrico Fermi and Leo Szilard and so forth, put together a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt. Fission had been done in Germany in December 38, and so in 1939, Einstein signed this letter, which was actually drafted by Szilard, urging Roosevelt to create a crash program, basically, a government program to fight fire with fire, to develop nuclear weaponry before the Germans did, and we did through the Manhattan Project. Turned out that we had won the war before there was any need to deal with Germany with nuclear weaponry, but we had some nuclear weapons around, and in any case, they were dropped on Japan. But then after the war comes this effort to keep going to...
I had heard that the second bomb was not necessary. They did it just because they wanted to see the difference in how it would affect the city.
Well, the first bomb was uranium bomb on Hiroshima, enriched uranium. The second bomb on Nagasaki, Fat Man and Little Boy, was a plutonium weapon. In any case, after the war, we continue at these laboratories. And again, going back to the contractors, GE and Westinghouse, you know how our U.S. government loves to contract out work with a big, Stone and Webster as well, big private contractors, and they wanted to perpetuate their contracts. The workers at those labs, the officials, wanted to perpetuate their jobs, their positions. But with nuclear weapons, I mean, there's a limit what you could. Well, you can't sell them. You know, I mean, you can only make
a limited market.
Make them to domestic use. So they looked to do more with nuclear technology, to use it for blasting big harbors.
Right.
And they thought they'd use it to have nuclear-powered airplanes and nuclear-powered rockets.
Right.
And
That's right.
Dr. Michio Kaku talks about the plan for a nuclear-powered toaster, and he tells the story about giving a lecture about this mad science scheme, a nuclear-powered toaster with plutonium, which would be around, that plutonium, for thousands upon thousands of years.
Hundreds of thousands.
And the scientist who developed it, it turned out, or planned for it, came up to him after the lecture and said, "Oh, that was my idea. What a crazy. I mean, we're talking mad science." In any case, Brookhaven Lab was set up to do strictly civilian and atomic, a little bit of military, and also atomic research. And in this report, and again, I'm looking right now at Cover Up, what you are not supposed to know about nuclear power. Here it is on page 9. I do right up front.
Okay.
On another page, is extensive analysis done more than a decade, this I write, before the 3 Mile Island near catastrophe in Pennsylvania declared, and here's the actual typing from the report: the possible size of the area of such a disaster might be equal to that of the state of Pennsylvania. And that's not out of context. That line is used over and over again in WASH 740 update. So my book, Cover Up, which listeners can, you can get it for free, all 327
It's a
pages.
very easy read, too, Karl. You did a great job. I mean, that's actually one of my questions to you. How do you get the time you write articles, you write these books, and you're a professor? Like, what time clock are you running on? That was kind of one of my questions. You seem to write an awful lot. Like, there's books coming out, articles coming out all the time. Specific to this, I know you do things on other things, but this is the thing. This industry, we're rattling the cages and working on it and telling people about it, and yet there is such still, I don't know, complacency or I'm just dumbfounded at how, I'm a YouTuber, right? And so I don't have a lot of followers. I have maybe 350 people. I don't have thousands of people. I've noticed that the people that get thousands of people, they're ranting, raving. Nobody ever shows up in the street. Few people write their senators and congressmen. everybody is intimidated. A nuclear scientist says, you don't know what you're talking about, and they back off because they don't know what they're talking about. Your book cover-up gives them a lot of information, but people won't. I'm just dumbfounded. How do we get Americans, at least, because that's our home, how do we get people to, care about the fact that they are being radiated? It's beyond comprehension.
Well, that's such a big question. How you get? I mean, through the years there have been the No Nukes concert. This goes back years ago. The rallies, the fight against nuclear. Frankly, it's alive and well. I mean, I'm on the board of what I think is an utterly marvelous organization, which I suggest listeners connect with. It's called Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear means we're way beyond it. We don't need nuclear power. We have solar and wind and so many safe, clean, renewable energy technologies ready and here to be used beyond nuclear. And in terms of weapons, I mean, we must be beyond nuclear weapons. I mean, if there is ever going to be a nuclear exchange, and I mean, there are people sitting in silos right now, people in submarines. We're in a hair-trigger situation, and it's just by the skin of our teeth. There's not been a nuclear exchange. There's not been nuclear war.
Look,
you know what? For all these decades.
I'm going to stop you. I think we have had a nuclear war. I mean, the nuclear war happened right after World War II. How many bombs did all the world powers drop on our planet? We are definitely, I mean, let's be clear that this whole fear about, we're going to have a nuclear war again, I mean, especially since Fukushima happened, it's ongoing. That thing is 5 years ongoing, and it is pouring still 100,000 tons of radioactive waste into the Pacific nonstop. 5 years. I don't know what you call a war, but that's a war. And then we're dropping depleted uranium weapons everywhere.
You're absolutely right. But what I'm considering is
the big bomb.
This is something to talk about. There are bombs. There are nuclear weapons on top of rockets right now in Russia in particular, aimed at New York and aimed at Chicago and aimed at Los Angeles. And likewise, we have at our facilities and in our submarines nuclear weapons aimed at Moscow. And I mean, it's not at all to say that we're not being. Fukushima is an ongoing. The word catastrophe is not strong enough.
That's
People
true.
are dying and will continue to die. But when we're talking about nuclear war and
annihilation, you're talking about immediate annihilation.
We're talking true apocalypse. We're talking about nuclear winter. We're talking about doomsday. So in any case, there are groups, there are organizations out there. Greenpeace. And if anybody wants to get in touch, incidentally, with Beyond Nuclear, just go to beyondnuclear.org and see all the things that are being done. And there are things that you could do to help out. Another great organization, it's just so important, is Greenpeace. And there's both Greenpeace USA, and the nuclear expert there is my old friend, from Long Island as well, Jim Riccio. Just go to Greenpeace USA's website or Greenpeace International.
Well, let me ask you this, not to be contentious. I want to ask you this because I have a personal issue about Greenpeace. I am stunned because I used to tremendously back Greenpeace until the Fukushima event happened. It's almost like they say nothing, they do nothing. I mean,
Lonnie, with all respect, complete respect, I disagree with you. In fact, the person who's working for Greenpeace right now in Japan, she's in Japan, is absolute treasure, an anti-nuclear treasure, and she's been so involved in fighting nuclear power plants here in the U.S., and she's been over now, I think, about 2 years, working for Greenpeace in Japan. Her name is Kendra Ulrich, Ulrich, and she is a diamond, and she's there. She's at Fukushima. Can you imagine going to?
No,
but Kendra's there. Kendra, incidentally, is also, because it's very important to have a big tent here, to have people not with little separate organizations and rivalries, but to work collectively, to work, because we're up against such power behind nuclear power. And Kendra Ulrich is on the board of Beyond Nuclear. In fact, I recommended to the board. I'm a charter member. Once I had seen Kendra speak at a meeting in Washington, actually organized by another great anti-nuclear group, Coalition Against Nukes, CAN, and that's a wonderful. And after I heard her speak, I was just blown away, and I suggested to the Beyond Nuclear board. I said, I just heard a woman speak at this gathering in Washington, who would be such an addition to our board, and so important too. I mean, Kendra is a young woman, and it's so important to bring youth into this battle, because this is one of the reasons, and I've mentioned this on your show before, one of the reasons I committed myself to becoming an investigative journalist is because when I was a college student, I went to Antioch College in Ohio, and they arranged an internship for me at a newspaper in Cleveland, a wonderful newspaper, the Cleveland Press, and goes way back, 1960. I was a copy boy, and I would put together memos on the basis of calls that I would receive, sitting at the desk that us copy boys and girls sat at, from readers in Cleveland and thereabouts. And when it was just an event in Cleveland, the city of Cleveland, I'd give it to the city desk, a little memo. When it was something about something happening in Shaker Heights, I'd give it to the suburban desk, Shaker Heights being a suburb of Cleveland. But if it was some horror story, some story of danger, of corruption, I would give it to a group of investigative reporters. Again, this is way back. And the thing that absolutely dazzled me I was 19 years old, was to see, took a few weeks before they would document what I would have in the memo. They would interview the people involved, and they would go to the documents, and they would go, they would use various investigative techniques, and they'd do an expose. And half the time, the horror story that I had been told on the phone was resolved based on the expose in the Cleveland Press. And at that moment, I decided I'm going to be an investigative reporter too. And in my career, which now stems over 50 years, about half the time, the horror stories that I have tackled as an investigative reporter have been resolved, not only because of media, not only because of exposés, but because of a combination of grassroots activity and the realities, the truth coming out through our press. As an example, here on Long Island, we were supposed to have 7 to 11 nuclear power plants. This was a plan pushed by that Brookhaven National Laboratory and the utility on Long Island, and very much involving, again, Brookhaven Lab, which was created to, as I note, promote nuclear technology, develop nuclear technology. In fact, in the last decade plus, the utility was led by William Catacasinos, who was the former assistant director of Brookhaven National Laboratory. And the scheme was to build 7 to 11 nuclear plants on Long Island, with a plant called Shoreham, which was actually completed to be the first. Now, there's no nuclear plants on Long Island. Long Island is nuclear power free. Shoreham, even though it was completed and went into it was low power testing, which was ready to go into commercial operation, but it was stopped from doing that by pressure by the people of Long Island, and some information that they were able to get through the media, and it's an important story of big and demonstrations and all kind of efforts. No nuclear power plants on Long Island, and not too incidentally, Brookhaven National Laboratory, which had two of its own reactors, which were leaking tritium into the groundwater of Long Island, and Long Island depends on the underground water table of the island as its sole source of potable water. And here at Brookhaven Lab, these two reactors, one being the high-flux beam reactor, were because of pressure by the folks of Long Island and by good information coming out through the media and by, a variety of measures shut down. So nuclear power does not exist on Long Island any longer. Long Island, New York is nuclear power free, and so should the United States be nuclear power free. In fact, just this week it was so important here, there was a decision to shut the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan years and years before its what was viewed as its lifetime. The utilities realized that not only is nuclear power expensive, new nuclear power plants cost $13 to $15 billion to build. Not only are they dirty, you don't need a catastrophic accident. Every nuclear power plant emits radioactivity routinely. Thus, there are cancer clusters around nuclear power plants. Another board that I'm on is very important.
John Goffman told us that very long ago.
What a man.
I'm actually going to read that oral history by John Goffman on my YouTube channel. You know what I hear you saying, really, Karl, and I'm really grateful that you're open enough to allow me to be honestly responsive. What I really hear is that there is simply not a network and not a venue. Like Kendra Ulrich, as you were speaking, I kind of was doing some internet search. She certainly has devoted her life to this. This is a person, I've been engaged in this 3 years, have not really heard her name, and I've done lots of different researches. And I hear you saying that really part of what's happening, why it appears that there's not a lot of activity, is really the suppression of the media really doesn't allow these activities to be well known. It's very difficult to find this information. So we really need to start really extending out the tentacles to create a much greater base so that we can upwell each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's so important that the internet, and I didn't expect it, has come along. When I first wrote Cover Up, it came after the effect. Just a quick background here. I'd like to get into media too, and that's what I do. I'm a professor of journalism as well as an investigative reporter. I was inspired to write Cover Up because I've also done not just books and many articles, God knows how many articles, in my lifetime, thousands upon thousands, but I've also done television. In fact, I host a show called Enviro Close-Up with Karl Grossman. Just speaking of YouTube, go see many of the shows. They've been run on Free Speech TV, and they're up now on YouTube. In any case, I was inspired.
Excuse me, let's say that again. Enviro Close-Up is on...
Enviro Close-Up. You can see many of the shows I've done.
Free Speech TV
I've hosted
YouTube.
Enviro Close-Up now for 25 years. And there's a website called Enviro Video. Mm-hmm. And that's a nonprofit entity, and I'm a principal in it with Steve Jambeck and Joan Flynn, the three of us. And we began it 1991. So
wow.
We've just had the 25th anniversary. We'll be going into our 26th year. And why I am so engaged and involved in Enviro Video with Steve and Joan, and why I keep knocking myself out writing, doing television, doing all I can, goes back to, and let me just give the backdrop. In the 70s, 1973 or 4, I believe. I was doing a show on the public broadcasting station, WLIW, here on Long Island, called Long Island World. And I was asked to do a show on nuclear power. I didn't know too much about it. It may have been 72. It was way back. And I went to Brookhaven National Laboratory, and I interviewed some of the early anti-nuke people. And then I went to Brookhaven National Laboratory, and I put a microphone in front of these scientists' faces, and I was told, oh, nuclear power is perfectly safe, like cigarettes. Perfectly safe. Maybe every couple of centuries, I was told. This was on the air. You might have a minor accident because of redundancy in these machines,
Free speech
nuclear
TV,
power plants.
a 24.
Then, I got more and more into nuclear power as the push came in the 70s to build 7 to 11 nuclear power plants here on Little Long Island, 120 miles long, about 16, 18 miles wide. You're going to have it would be big complexes like you have at Fukushima. Long Island was to be turned in the parlance of the nuclear promoters at the time into a nuclear park. In any case, I got inspired to do cover-up the day that I got the news that the 3 Mile Island accident had begun. And I quickly realized, it took a millisecond, that those scientists at Brookhaven National Laboratory were attempting to bamboozle me and attempting to bamboozle the viewers of WLIW. And this has been an MO, this has been a modus operandi of the nuclear mafia, the nuclear establishment. So I thought I'd write a book. A woman named Hilda Lindley, she's passed now, hot agent in New York, top agent. She had read some of the stuff I had been writing in Long Island newspapers about nuclear power, and she said, "Well, now with 3 Mile Island, it's time to do a book, Karl. Would you like to do a book?" So I started writing the book, and then a few weeks later, Hilda got back to me, and we're talking about a top agent, top Manhattan literary agent. She says, "I can't believe it. These people are telling me at these major publishing houses that there wouldn't be any interest in nuclear power after a few months after this whole controversy over 3 Mile Island cools down." But she didn't like. She didn't accept what they were saying. In any case, Cover Up was finally published by a small press here on Long Island, run by, in fact, I just saw him this morning at Schiavone's, the grocery store here in Sag Harbor, by Martin Shepard, a very stable and insane man. In fact, he began his working life as a psychiatrist, and his wife is the wonderful Judith Shepard. They had put together just a few years earlier a company with a funny name called Permanent Press, and I met Marty at a party here in Sag Harbor, and Judy, and I told them, just like I'm telling you and your listeners now, about the problems of this. Is in the weeks after the 3 Mile Island disaster began, the problems writing a book about nuclear power, the truth about nuclear power, that it won't beat a few minor accidents over a few centuries. And Marty and Judy said, "We'll publish the book." So the book was then put out. I wrote it, worked my tail off through 1979. It was published in 1980. And because of, I mentioned the generosity of the publishers, because of the generosity of Marty and Judy and Shepard, the book is now the updated version, post-Fukushima of the book, is available for free online. And then just
it's
a story.
Awesome. Everybody listening to this interview ought to really download it. It's a great reference book. It gives a lot of, none of the science, none of the things, and it really does disclose the mentality of what our government, that was the thing that shocked me.
Well, just if I can add here, why the book is out there and free is because this goes back to my experience in 1979. After Fukushima, Marty called and said, let's do an update of Cover Up. So I began working on the new introduction and so forth. And then Marty and Judy attempted to go to major publishers and interest them in an updated version of Cover Up, What You're Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power, which is, has been available now for decades. And it's, as I say, it's so useful as a handbook. And
Yeah.
they approached publishers, and their agents approached publishers, and guess what happened? This is, 5.5 years ago now. The same thing that happened in 1979. No, we're not interested. So Marty and Judy not only went ahead with the new edition, but they went ahead making sure it's online for free for folks just to download and get the information. And I'm so indebted to them, as everybody should be, because, and I'm getting back to what you said, a big problem here is the media, and the way it's been manipulated by the nuclear establishment. Indeed, I start the book, and I'm reading just from this is the old intro, but it's still in the new edition. But as what I originally wrote, you have not been informed about nuclear power. You have not been told, and that has been done on purpose. Keeping the public in the dark was deemed necessary by the promoters of nuclear power if it would succeed. So those in government, science, private industry that were pushing nuclear power realized that people were given the facts. If they knew the consequences of nuclear power, they wouldn't stand for it. And then they go on how an army of public relations practitioners has been working for decades to, in the jargon of the trade, make the people think of, quote, citizen Adam, unquote, as a friend before the truth became manifest. The nuclear runaways and meltdowns that China soon will come, it was figured. So would the routine and, quote, releases of radioactivity from nuclear plants and their results, cancer, leukemia, and genetic injury. And I go on, in that introduction talking about how suppression of information has been just integral, has been instrumental. When I've given lectures, and I've given since the Cover Up came out, I've been on the lecture circuit. And it takes me about an hour and a half to explain things at a college or a university or before an assemblage. And I do it with, these days, PowerPoint, used to be slides, with these original documents. And it takes about an hour and a half, but once people are given the information, once people are given the facts, that's it. They don't want nuclear power. I mean, maybe people don't read like they used to, but the survival instinct is still operable. And when people see, well, for example, this is more recent, Sandia National Laboratories down in New Mexico put a report out. It's called the Crack 2 report, Calculation Reactor Accident Consequences 2, Crack 2 report, and it was done for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It lists every nuclear power plant in the United States and projects peak early fatalities, peak early injuries, peak cancer deaths, and the cost in billions for, a part of the planet rendered uninhabitable for perpetuity. Every nuclear plant, and when those numbers flash, when people in the New York area see that in this report done by actual nuclear promoters at Sandia National Laboratory, acknowledges that if there's an accident at the Indian Point nuclear plants, this is just 26 miles north of New York City, 22 million people live within 50 miles of the Indian Point plants. And here in Crack 2, and you can get these numbers, just Google, listeners should Google Crack, C-R-A-C -2, and you'll see the whole report. It's there, it's online. And when people see these numbers, they see that the projection, if Indian Point, there's 2 operating plants up there, Buchanan, New York, if either of them, catastrophic accident. In any case, what these government employees at Sandia project is tens of thousands of prompt early fatalities and tens of thousands of cancer deaths. And for Indian Point 3, the report was done in 1980. The report was 1982.
You know what's astounding about this, Karl, is that I pulled this article up. It's talking about $314 billion, 50,000 deaths, 100. But this is not even. This is talking about a catastrophic accident. It's not even talking about the deaths that the current accident, the high levels of tritium, the current levels of tritium are 65,000% over the allowable rates pouring into the Hudson River right now.
Oh, well, absolutely. And both these plants are operating without licenses. The utility that owns these two nuclear plants is seeking what nerve to have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission extend the licenses.
And Chuck Schumer said we need it.
Another 20 years, to have them run 60 years. Nuclear plants were never seen as operating beyond 40 years because in 40 years they become so irradiated.
Right.
The metals in particular become so embrittled that would be it. But in any case, there's this push to have these nuclear power plants run for in fact, at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they're talking about running giving license extensions for nuclear power plants for 80 years.
Right.
I mean, unbelievable. And also
it's unconscionable.
Most of the nuclear plants is a little less than, thankfully, 100. Nixon wanted 1,000 by the year 2000 nuclear plants in the United States. But there's a little less than 100 nuclear plants. And at this point, over 80 have had their 40-year licenses extended for 60 years. And also what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been doing is operating the plants. In other words, allowing the utilities to run them hotter and harder to produce more electricity, but also creating in these old nuclear power plants even a greater likelihood of absolute disaster. Nevertheless, this company, it's called Entergy, that runs these two nuclear plants, is here in the New York area. You're in the West Coast. Here in the New York area, you can't miss when you turn on the radio these ads from Entergy saying that these nuclear plants are necessary for the economy of New York. And you mentioned the $300 billion with a big plus in damages projected by the Sandia National Laboratory scientists for Indian Point 3 if it underwent a catastrophic accident, a meltdown with a breach of containment. The $300 billion plus is what they projected, but that was when the plan came out and the report came out in 1982, and that's $1980. So if Indian Point 3 went, you figure that the dollar has tripled in value. We're talking about a nuclear plant accident which would render a portion of New York State very close to New York. I mean, if the wind is blowing from the north down to New York City, you're talking about New York City being involved, rendered uninhabitable for perpetuity, $1 trillion in property damage. Okay, dollars are one thing. Lives are far more important. As I know, 22 million people living within the danger zone, 50 miles of the two Indian Point plants. When the Fukushima complex went, our State Department told U.S. citizens living within 50 miles of Fukushima to evacuate. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has, you got to remember, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Atomic Energy Commission, it's really the NRC, no real concerns, or Nuclear Rubber Stamp Commission, that really should be the names of that agency.
Yeah.
But neither the AEC, the NRC.
I call them the nuclear regulatory cheerleaders. That's what they are.
Cheerleaders do. Never denied an operating or construction license for any nuclear power plant anywhere, anytime in the United States. And now are rubber stamping these license extensions. In any case, the NRC insists that the emergency zone for evacuation around a nuclear plant is just 10 miles. That's in complete contradiction to what the U.S. government, through the State Department, told U.S. citizens after Fukushima. It should be at the very least, 50 miles. And here you have 22 million people.
That's right.
Living within 50 miles.
That's why I'm so freaked out about the Columbia Generating Station. It is only 15 miles away from Hanford, and those pits at Hanford have to be maintained 24 hours a day or they will explode after 2 or 3 days.
Oh, yeah.
So if we have a nuclear meltdown because of an earthquake at the Columbia Generating Station, North America is toast. So I'm constantly talking. I think that's our most urgent plant to shut down. But you know what, Karl? We have like 2.5 minutes left.
I
can't believe this has gone so fast. Exactly. Thank you for saying that.
They all need to be shut down.
That's right.
Oh, and just a little history, Lonnie, if I could, because I've been talking a lot of history here. Those reactors at Hanford, that's to a large degree how we got into the nuclear power plant thing. They were built during the war by the Manhattan Project people up at Hanford as plutonium production facilities. These reactors, because plutonium is produced as a byproduct of fission, and they figured they wouldn't have enough enriched uranium to make the atomic bombs they wanted. They had enough of the Hiroshima bomb, but they figured plutonium would be the weapons fuel of choice beyond enriched uranium. And then there was so much heat involved in the production of the plutonium in these production reactors. Then they got the bright idea, well, let us build nuclear power plants. And in fact, the original concept was dual use, to produce plutonium for more and more atomic bombs, and also as a byproduct, produce electricity from the heat, boiling water, turning a turbine, and so on.
Well, what a failed experiment, huh?
A lot of history. A lot of history up at Hanford. Tragic history.
Tragic. Well, look, Karl, thank you for joining us. We have about a minute left. I do encourage all of our listeners to please do download this copy of Cover Up. It is essential. Go to karlgrossman.com. Look at all the work that he's done. Karl, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you being a friend of our show. I hope to have you back on because this is so valuable for all of us and all of our children.
Great. And again, listeners, check my piece. It's on Counterpunch. It's on Nation of Change. It's on Portside.
Yes, it's
just in recent days on
about
the Trump
Star Wars
administration's their likely deployment of nuclear-powered weapons in space.
Wow, it's very frightening. Well, thank you,
we got to stop
Karl.
it. We got to fight it.
That's right. Put your courage feet on, take action, every voice matters, and be the magnificent beings that we were born to be and that we are. That's the thing. We need to remember that. So put your courage feet on. We'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully Karl will come back with us.
Anytime.